The city looked like it had given up. Not in the way a city looks after a storm, where things are damaged but still feel like they can be fixed. This was different. Buildings had been split open like old bread. Whole streets were just piles of stone and twisted metal. The kind of place where you stopped expecting to see anything normal. A shop sign, a flower pot on a windowsill, a cat sitting in the sun. All of that was gone. What was left was dust, silence, and the cold. A small group of soldiers moved through what used to be the city's center. Their boots crunched over broken glass. Nobody talked much. After enough days in a place like this, you stop filling the silence. There is nothing useful to say, and everyone knows it. So they just moved, checking streets, clearing corners, doing the job. One of them walked a little slower than the others. He was maybe in his mid-30s. Not especially tall, with the kind of tired face that comes not from one bad night, but from months of them. He had been in this city for 3 weeks already, long enough to know which streets were the most dangerous, long enough to stop flinching at certain sounds, but also long enough to notice things the others had started to ignore, the way a child's shoe sat in a doorway, perfectly placed, like someone had just stepped out of it. A cracked picture frame in a pile of rubble, the photo inside still intact. A kitchen calendar on a half-standing wall, still open to the month the war came. He noticed these things because he had learned that if you stop noticing small things, you start to lose something important inside yourself. He couldn't name what that something was. He just knew he didn't want to lose it. The patrol reached a large building near the edge of the square. Or what had been a square. It was hard to tell anymore. The front of the building had collapsed completely, leaving the inside exposed to the open sky like a giant dollhouse with the front wall removed. You could see rows of old seats, most of them buried under rubble. A stage, high walls that had once been decorated with something plaster patterns, maybe paint, now just gray and cracked. A concert hall, not a big one, but a real one. The kind of place a city is proud of. Most of the men glanced at it and kept walking, but he stopped. There, in the middle of the stage, still standing, somehow untouched amid everything that had been destroyed around it, was a piano, an old upright. Black, or it had been black once. Parts of the wood were scorched at the edges, and one of the front legs had cracked, so the whole thing leaned very slightly to one side. The seat in front of it was still there too, a small padded stool that had seen better days. But the piano itself, the body of it, the lid, the keys, was in one piece, in a building that had been torn apart, in a city that had been torn apart. This piano had simply stayed. He stood and looked at it for a long moment. Nobody called out to him. Nobody told him to leave it. Maybe they didn't notice he had stopped. Maybe they did and said nothing. Either way, he found himself walking toward the stage, stepping over a fallen beam, climbing the 3 steps at the side, and sitting down on that small stool. He set his rifle across his knees. He sat like that for a moment, just looking at the keys. Some of them were yellowed. A few were chipped. Several were missing altogether, leaving small dark gaps like missing teeth. He reached out slowly and pressed one key with one finger, middle C, the most ordinary note on a piano, the first note almost everyone learns. It worked. The sound that came out was thin and slightly off, the way a very old piano sounds when it hasn't been tuned in years. But it was a real note. It rose up into the cold air, into the broken rafters, up through the open roof, into the pale gray sky above. Something shifted in his chest. He had not touched a piano in 11 years. He had studied music for 2 years as a younger man, not at a famous school, just a small conservatory in his hometown, the kind of place run by teachers who were deeply serious about something most people around them treated as a hobby. He had to stop going when money got difficult. Life moved on, as it does. He became other things, a son, a husband, a worker, then a soldier. The music had folded itself up and gone somewhere quiet inside him, like a letter you keep but stop rereading. Now his hands moved to the keys, almost on their own. He started with something slow, a piece he had memorized long ago, a nocturne. One of those soft, searching pieces of music that doesn't announce itself. It hust begins like a quiet conversation. His right hand found the melody. It was hesitant at first, his fingers stiff and uncertain. He hit a wrong note, then another. He didn't stop. It kept going in slowly, the way something frozen takes time to move. His hands began to remember. The music was not perfect, with several keys missing and the tuning off. It couldn't be, but it had something in it that went beyond perfect. It had something honest. Every note that came out of that battered piano felt like it had earned the right to exist, because in a place where so much had been silenced, each sound was a small act of survival. The men in his unit had stopped moving. Nobody gave an order to stop. Nobody said anything at all. They just went still, the way people do when something cuts through all the noise in their head and makes them listen. One man lowered his radio. Another, who had been checking a map, folded it slowly and put it away. They stood in the rubble of the concert hall and they listened to a soldier play a broken piano in the middle of a ruined city, and not one of them spoke. The music moved through the empty building and out into the open air, and for a few minutes, in a place where almost everything had been taken, something that could not be taken was given back. Sound travels differently in a ruined city. In a normal city, music gets swallowed up by traffic, by voices, by the everyday noise of people going about their lives. But in a city that has gone quiet the way this one had, sound moves like light in a dark room. It finds every corner. It slips through gaps and broken walls. It rises straight up into the open sky with nothing to stop it. The music from that piano went out in every direction. And slowly, without any announcement, without anyone calling out or knocking on a door, people began to come. The first was an old woman. She appeared at the top of a staircase that led up from a basement shelter across what used to be the street. She had a blanket pulled around her shoulders and she moved carefully, the way people move when their bones have been hurting for a long time. She stopped at the edge of what had been the concert hall entrance and just stood there. She didn't try to get closer. She didn't wave or call out. She just stood in the cold and listened with her eyes half closed, the way you listen to something you recognize but can't quite name. Then two boys appeared, young ones, maybe 9 and 12 years old, climbing over a low wall of rubble on the far side of the square. They had the cautious look of children who had learned to be careful in open spaces. They crouched behind the wall at first, just their heads visible, watching. Then, slowly, they climbed fully over and sat on top of the rubble together, side by side, not saying anything to each other. More people came after that. A man with a bandaged hand. A woman carrying a small bag like she had been on her way somewhere and simply stopped. A few more soldiers from the patrol, who had drifted back when they realized what was happening. Each person arrived quietly and stayed quietly, finding their own spot in the ruins of that old hall without anyone directing them where to go. None of them knew each other, or maybe some of them did in a city reduced to a few hundred remaining people. Maybe everyone knows everyone. But it didn't matter. What was forming in that broken space was not a crowd. It was something more like what happens around a fire on a cold night. People come toward the warmth, not because they planned to, but because something in them simply moves that way. The soldier at the piano did not look up. He had finished the nocturne a few minutes earlier, played it all the way through, to the end, including the quiet final bars, where the melody seems to dissolve rather than stop. He had sat with his hands in his lap for a moment, not thinking about anything in particular, just breathing. Then something came to him, not a decision exactly, more like a memory surfacing. And he started playing again. This time, it was a folk song, an old one from his childhood. The kind of melody that doesn't belong to any one composer but to a whole people, passed down through generations, the way recipes and stories are passed down. His grandmother used to hum it while she worked in the kitchen. He hadn't thought about that in years, but somehow his hands knew where to go. The melody was simple, almost childlike in its simplicity. Just a few notes, repeating and turning, like someone walking a familiar road. But simple music, played honestly, does something that complicated music sometimes can't. It goes straight in. It doesn't ask anything of you. It just arrives. The old woman at the entrance pulled her blanket tighter. One of her hands came up slowly and covered her mouth. She was not crying, or maybe she was, hoosed slightly, the way very old people sometimes cry, without drama, as if grief and tenderness have been living together inside them for so long they no longer try to separate themselves. The two boys on the rubble wall sat completely still. The older one had his arms crossed on his knees, and his chin resting on his arms. The younger one was leaning against his brother's shoulder, eyes fixed on the stage. Neither of them moved for the entire time the music played. For two boys of that age, in any other circumstance, sitting that still would have been almost impossible, but they sat like small stones, listening. A journalist was there too. She had been embedded with the patrol for several days, documenting what was happening in the city. She had her camera with her. She always had her camera. When the piano started and people began to gather, she lifted it out of habit, looked through the lens, framed a shot. It was a good shot. The soldier at the piano, the ruined hall behind him, the pale winter sky above, the small scattered group of people listening in the ruble. It was the kind of image that wins awards. She lowered the camera without taking the picture. She couldn't explain it fully, even later when people asked her. It just felt wrong to turn it into an image, like it would take something away from what was actually happening. So she put the camera back and just stood there with everyone else, and she listened. The song ended. The soldier sat quietly for a moment, with his hands resting on his knees. Then he reached forward and very carefully, with the kind of care you use for something fragile, closed the lid over the keys. He stood up. He picked up his rifle from where it had been resting. He stepped down from the stage and walked back toward his unit, boots quiet on the stone and grit. He did not say anything. He did not look at the people who had gathered. Not because he was trying to be mysterious or cold, more because there was simply nothing to say. Whatever had just happened had already said itself. His commanding officer was waiting near the edge of the square. A serious man, the kind who'd always run a tight unit, who believed that discipline was what kept men alive and that sentiment was something you dealt with after the job was done, not during. He looked at the soldier as he approached. He didn't ask questions. He didn't comment on any of it. He just said, quietly, "Move out," and turned and led the patrol forward. But his voice was different. Slightly. The men who had been with him long enough noticed it softer at the edges, like something in him had shifted by a degree or two. Nobody pointed it out. Nobody would. But they all felt it. Behind them, the small group of people who had gathered began to slowly drift away. The old woman went back down her basement steps. The two boys climbed back over their wall. The others disappeared into doorways and side streets, back into whatever survival looked like for them that day. The piano stayed where it was. Nobody moved it. Nobody came back for it. It just stood there on that half-open stage, leaning slightly on its cracked leg, surrounded by the quiet that followed. It had been there before the soldiers came, and it was there after they left. Whether anyone ever played it again, nobody knows. But here's the thing about that morning. The thing worth holding on to. In the middle of everything that had been destroyed, one person sat down and did something purely human. Not heroic, not strategic. Not for any reason that could be written in a report. Just played. And for about 20 minutes, in a city that had almost forgotten what ordinary life felt like. Ordinary life came back. Not in a big way. In the smallest, most fragile way. But it came back, and every single person who was there felt it. That is what music does, that nothing else can. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change the facts on the ground. It doesn't rebuild what has been broken. But it reminds you, even when reminding yourself feels almost impossible, that you are still a person. That beauty is not just something that existed once, in better times. That it lives inside you, and it does not go away just because the world around you has. The soldier never spoke about that morning publicly. He didn't give interviews or explain himself. He went back to work. The war continued, as wars do. But those who were there, the old woman, the two boys, the journalist who chose not to take the photograph, the men in the patrol, each of them carried that 20 minutes with them. Quietly. The way you carry the things that matter most.